The golden drawing room of Westmere House had not changed in 8 years. The curtains hung at half-draw, neither opened nor closed, as though someone had reached for them once and then thought better of it. Lady Vivian Devereux, Duchess of Westmere, had long since stopped noticing them. Or so she told herself on the mornings when she caught herself looking. She was 38 years old, the daughter of a diplomat, and she had been carrying a secret for so long that it had begun to feel less like a burden and more like a second skeleton, something structural, something that held her upright. She poured tea with steady hands. She received guests with a smile that London's finest hostesses had studied and failed to reproduce. And on the afternoon of the 14th of May, in the cold, yellow light of a city that never quite managed warmth, she was pouring for Lady Marbury and her daughter when the lackey appeared at the door with a name that made the room go still. Mrs. Lisle had not been announced. She had given her card at the door and walked in behind it, and she moved through the entrance of the drawing room with the particular ease of a woman who has been received in a house before, not by the mistress of it. She was perhaps 32, dressed in the deep rose that suited her complexion and that she wore often enough that Vivian had come to think of it as a kind of uniform. She was not unintelligent. That was the detail Vivian had always found most interesting, because an unintelligent woman in Mrs. Lisle's position would have been easier to dismiss, and London would have dismissed her years ago. Instead, she was sharp in the particular way of someone who had learned that charm was a tool and was not embarrassed to use it. She seated herself on the settee across from Lady Marbury, without being invited, took in the room with a single sweep of her eyes, and smiled at Vivienne across the tea tray. "What a pleasant afternoon for a visit," Mrs. Lisle said. "I hope I am not interrupting." "Not at all," Vivienne replied, and set a cup before Lady Marbury's daughter with the same attention she would have given it had the room contained only them. Lady Marbury, who was 61 and had survived 4 decades of London society by the simple method of noticing everything and appearing to notice nothing, made a small adjustment to her gloves. Mrs. Lisle let the silence sit for precisely the length of time required to make it uncomfortable. And then she laughed. A bright social sound that belonged at a garden party and not in a drawing room at 3 in the afternoon. "You are so wonderfully composed, Your Grace," she said. "I have always admired it, though I do sometimes wonder if Lucian finds it. Well," she tilted her head slightly, "he needs a real woman, I think, not a portrait." And she laughed again, this time directing the laugh across the room like something thrown. The sound of it reached every corner. Lady Marbury's daughters stopped breathing. Lady Marbury herself became very still, her teacup suspended at the precise height at which she had lifted it, and she did not lower it. Vivian set the teapot down. The sound it made was small, a single precise click of porcelain against the silver tray, and it was the only sound in the room for a full 3 seconds. Vivienne did not flush. She did not straighten her spine, because her spine was already straight. She turned her head toward the door with the unhurried attention of a woman deciding where to place a piece of furniture, and she spoke to the lackey stationed at the threshold. "James," she said, "open the door fully, please." James opened it. The hallway beyond became visible, the black and white marble floor, the brass fittings on the side table, the afternoon light coming in from the front windows at the far end. Vivienne turned back to Mrs. Lisle. "I wonder," she said, and her voice was so even and so quiet that Lady Marbury would later describe it to 3 separate dinner companions as the most frightening thing she had heard in 40 years. "If you might describe her for me." This real woman. She paused. Slowly, if you please. The smile on Mrs. Lyle's face did not disappear immediately. It stayed for perhaps 4 seconds, which was long enough for everyone in the room to watch it become something else. Something smaller and less certain, like a flame in a draft. "I'm sure I only meant," Mrs. Lyle began. "Her qualities," Vivian said. She lifted her own teacup. "Her specific qualities. What she does that I do not. What she offers that is so particular to her that a man of Lucian's intelligence and position could not find it elsewhere, or manufacture it himself, or do without it." She took a sip. "Take your time." Mrs. Lyle opened her mouth. She closed it. She opened it again, and what came out was not a description. It was the beginning of a laugh that failed to become a laugh, and then a sentence that failed to become a sentence, and then a silence that was so complete and so damning that Lady Marbury lowered her teacup at last and looked at her hands. Because Mrs. Lyle could not produce the description. The passion she had implied, the necessity she had claimed. It did not exist in any form she could name in front of 2 witnesses in a room with an open door. She had never been asked to name it, and naming it was impossible. And the woman across the tea tray had known that before she asked. Mrs. Lyle rose. She gathered herself with what dignity remained, which was not much, and she said something about another engagement, and she left. Her footsteps crossed the marble hallway. The front door opened and closed. The drawing room exhaled. Lady Marbury set her cup down with great care. Her daughter was looking at the window. Neither of them spoke for a moment. And then Lady Marbury said, in a voice from which she had removed almost everything, "What a remarkable afternoon." "Quite," said Vivian, and refilled the cups. Lady Marbury and her daughter departed within 20 minutes, which was approximately the time required to finish their tea and reach the mutual unspoken agreement that there was nothing more to witness and a great deal to report. Vivian stood at the window and watched their carriage move into the street. And she counted privately the dinner tables that would carry the story by the following evening. 6, she estimated. Possibly 8, if Lady Marbury's daughter was less discreet than her mother. When the carriage turned the corner, Vivian crossed to the writing desk. It was a small piece of furniture, rosewood, with a single drawer on the left side that required a key she kept on a chain at her wrist. She had not opened that drawer in front of anyone. She had not opened it in company or in daylight or on any of the 40 or so occasions in 8 years when she had stood at this desk and been tempted. She had opened it alone at night, precisely twice, once on the 1st anniversary of her wedding and once on the 5th. She opened it now, in the afternoon, in the cold yellow light, with the curtains still at half-draw. Inside was a single folded document, sealed with wax that had been broken and repressed so many times, the seal no longer held a clean impression. Beside it lay a small card, on which she had written, in her own hand, a single date and a notation. 8 years and 1 day. She had been counting since the morning of her wedding. She had counted through the first 6 months. When the political sensitivity window had been at its most acute, and the confession had been, in the most literal legal sense, untouchable. She had counted through the years that followed, when the window had passed, but the consequences had not. And through the mornings when she had stood at this desk and known that the date on the card was not yet what it needed to be. Today it was. 8 years and 1 day. 1 day past the window. 1 day past the moment at which any legal or political challenge to the document's legitimacy could be mounted on the grounds of timing. She read the date. She read it again. She folded the document back along its original creases, replaced it in the drawer, and locked it. Then she remained at the desk as the afternoon light moved across the half-drawn curtains she had never once ordered changed. And she let herself feel, for the first time in 8 years, the particular sensation of a woman who has been waiting for a specific day and has finally arrived at it. Lucien came home after midnight. Vivienne heard him in the hall, his step on the marble, the quiet exchange with the night footman, the pause before he came further into the house. She was in the private library, the small one at the back of the ground floor that had been her father's room before it became hers, and she had left the door open. She heard him stop outside it. He came in. He was still in his evening coat, which told her the dinner had been a formal one. He looked at her across the room with the expression she had come to know over 8 years. The one that was not quite distance and not quite attention. The face of a man who had been performing a role so long that he had forgotten what his features did when he was not performing. He crossed to the side table and poured 2 glasses of brandy. He set one on the corner of her desk and took the other to the chair across from her. He did not drink. Neither did she. "You had a visitor this afternoon," he said. "I had several," Vivienne replied. "Lady Marbury, her daughter, and Mrs. Lyle, who arrived without an invitation and sat down without being asked." Lucien looked at his glass. "I heard." "From whom?" she asked. 3 separate sources before 10 o'clock. He paused. "I am told you asked her to describe herself." "I asked her to describe the woman you apparently require," Vivienne said. "She found she could not do it." He said nothing. "I have decided," Vivienne said, "to reclaim the confession from the Foreign Office archive." The change in the room was not dramatic. Lucien did not stand, did not raise his voice, did not make any visible movement at all. But something shifted in the quality of his stillness. "You cannot," he said. "The political consequences will reach the cabinet within a week. Lord Ashford will—" "I am not asking you," Vivienne said. "Vivienne." He leaned forward slightly, his elbows on his knees, his untouched glass held in both hands. "That document protected 3 people. If you produce it publicly, those protections dissolve. The ministerial position, the committee appointments, Yours," she said. "You mean yours. Lord Ashford's position has been secure for 12 years and will survive whatever I do. It is your position that concerns you. It concerns me because—" "You chose this," he said. The words came out like something that had been stored under pressure, something that had been waiting for the right moment and had decided this was it. "You chose it, Vivienne. I told you not to sign it. I told you the morning you brought it to me that I would not accept it. You did it anyway." She had known he would say it. She had known since the moment she decided to open the drawer that this conversation was coming. And she had spent the hours since the afternoon preparing the answer she had never before spoken aloud. "I chose it for 6 months," she said. "The sensitivity window, the ministerial crisis, the committee vote. 6 months. I chose it for 6 months, and it was mine to choose. And I do not regret it." She looked at him directly. "But you chose it for the rest of my life. You chose it every morning you walked past me in this house. You chose it every evening you went to your club instead of your own drawing room. You chose it when you authorized the arrangement with Mrs. Lyle 3 years ago, because a distant marriage was more useful to you than a present one." She paused. "I chose 6 months. You chose 8 years. Those are not the same choice." Lucian did not answer. He set his glass down on the side table with a care that suggested he was concentrating very hard on the placement of it. Then he stood, and he walked to the door, and he left the room without speaking. Vivienne remained in the library. The fire burned down to coals, and then the coals went gray, and the room grew cold. And she did not move. She sat in the dark with the two untouched glasses and the silence of a house in which every room contained something that had been left unsaid for 8 years. And she waited for the light. When it came, pale and thin through the library's single east-facing window, she drew the writing paper toward her, dipped the pen, and wrote the letter to the Foreign Office. She wrote it in the clear, formal hand her father had taught her when she was 12 years old, and they had been stationed in Vienna. She sealed it. She rang for the footman. "The first post," she said. "Please ensure it goes with the first post." He took it. The door closed behind him. And Vivienne sat in the cold library and listened to the sound of a letter that could not be recalled leaving her house. The Foreign Office replied 4 days later. The document would be released in 30 days, subject to standard archival procedure and the applicant's formal identification at the time of collection. 30 days. Vivienne read the letter twice, folded it, and placed it in the rosewood drawer beside the sealed document it concerned. 30 days was precisely the length of time Caroline's engagement could survive the renewed rumors now circulating through London's drawing rooms. Vivienne's younger sister had been engaged to Mr. Alderton for 6 weeks, and the Alderton family was respectable, careful, and acutely sensitive to social opinion. The gossip about Vivienne that Mrs. Lyle's failed afternoon visit had stirred back into circulation was not, on its own, fatal. But it was inconvenient, and inconvenience had a way of becoming catastrophe when a future mother-in-law began paying close attention. Lord Ashford summoned Lucian within the week. Vivienne knew because Lucian came to her study the morning after the summons. Formally, with his hat in his hand, as though calling on an acquaintance, and asked if she would reconsider the timing of the retrieval. She looked up from the letter she was writing. "No," she said. He came again 3 days later, and this time he sat down, which was a change from the previous visit, and he spoke for longer. About the committee, about Lord Ashford's position, about the particular sensitivity of the foreign policy matters that had been adjacent to the original document. Vivienne listened. She listened with her full attention, which she had always given him even when he had not noticed it. And when he finished, she said, "I understand the consequences to the ministry. I have understood them for 8 years. My answer remains the same." He left. The study door closed with the same careful quietness as always. At Lady Marbury's dinner the following Thursday, Mrs. Lyle made her second attempt. She arrived early, positioned herself at the end of the room nearest the door, and waited. When Vivienne entered on the arm of Lord Marbury, who was 70 and partially deaf and enormously useful on such occasions, Mrs. Lyle straightened and prepared the expression she had prepared. Vivienne walked past her, not around her, past her in the sense that Mrs. Lyle ceased to exist as a point of orientation in the room. Vivienne turned to Lady Ashmore on her left and continued a remark she had apparently been making before she entered, something about the new exhibition at the Royal Academy, and she moved through the room with the unhurried attention of a woman who had found the conversation she wanted and intended to stay in it. She spoke to Lord Fenwick. She spoke to the younger Marbury daughter. She moved from one end of the room to the other over the course of 40 minutes, and at no point did her body orient itself toward Mrs. Lyle's side of the room. and at no point did her gaze travel in that direction. And at no point did she give any indication, through word or posture or the angle of her head, that she was aware of Mrs. Lyle's presence in the room at all. By the time dinner was announced, the entire party had noticed. By the following morning, London's better drawing rooms were murmuring that something had shifted in the Westmere marriage, though no one could say with confidence in which direction. It was the Latin that brought them into the same room. Vivienne had been going through her late father's diplomatic papers for 3 weeks, a task she had deferred since his death 2 years ago, and which she had finally begun with the particular resolve of a woman who has decided to put her own house in order before asking anything of anyone else. The papers were extensive. Her father had served in 4 postings over 30 years, and his correspondence was meticulous, and most of it she could manage alone. But there was a phrase in a letter from the Vienna posting, 1851, written in the formal Latin of a legal instrument, and it was a phrase she could not parse with confidence. The grammar was oblique, and the abbreviations were those of a specific diplomatic tradition she had not encountered. She sent a note to Lucian's study. He came to her within the hour, which surprised her. She had expected him to send a reply, suggesting a time the following day, the formal courtesy of a household that operated on appointment. Instead, he appeared in the doorway of her study with his coat still on, the note in his hand, and she understood that the Latin had given him an excuse he had been looking for. She moved the papers to one side so he could stand at the desk beside her. He leaned forward, his finger tracing the line of text, reading it twice with the slow attention of someone working through a construction that required care. Vivienne stood at the corner of the desk. Her hand rested on the edge of the page, an inch from where his finger moved along the text. Neither of them moved away. "The verb is passive here," he said. "But the subject is the instrument itself, not the parties to it. It is saying that the agreement cannot be dissolved by either party acting alone. It requires the consent of both the original signatories or their legal representatives." He paused. "It is a protection clause." "Against unilateral action," Vivienne said. "Yes," he confirmed. The translation had taken perhaps 90 seconds. The silence that followed lasted considerably longer, and in that silence his finger had stilled on the page and her hand had not moved from the corner of it. And they were close enough that she could see the line of tension along his jaw that she had learned to read 8 years ago, as the face he made when he was trying not to say something he needed to say. Then the study door opened and the footman entered with the afternoon post. Caroline's letter was on top. Vivienne read it standing at the desk with Lucienne still beside her, and she read it once, and then she set it down. "The engagement," she said. "What has happened?" Lucienne asked, and the question came out without the formal distance he usually maintained, simply and directly, like a man asking because he wanted to know. "Mrs. Alderton has heard the fresh gossip. Caroline has 1 month before the engagement collapses." Vivienne folded the letter. "The 30 days from the Foreign Office and the 30 days of Caroline's engagement are the same 30 days. Lucian was quiet. "It was always going to be this way," Vivienne said. "Every choice I made to protect someone has eventually cost someone else. The confession protected you. Now the cost of reclaiming it falls on Caroline." She looked at him. "I am going to reclaim it anyway. I want you to understand that before anything else happens." He said, after a moment, "I know." She waited. "There is something I should have told you 3 years ago," he said. He moved to the chair across from the desk and sat down, and his hands rested on his knees with the stillness of a man who has rehearsed the beginning of a sentence many times and is now committed to finishing it. Mrs. Lyle's arrangement with this household was not of my making, in the way that you have believed it was. Lord Ashford came to me in the spring of 1868. He said the ministry required the appearance of a marriage that was distant, managed, that a duke who maintained a visible personal life, separate from his wife, was a more useful political asset than one whose domestic situation was ambiguous. He paused. He found her. He arranged the terms. He pays the stipend through a third account. Vivienne looked at him. I authorized it, Lucian said. I want to be clear about that. I said yes when I should have said no, and I have said nothing to you for 3 years, and that is mine to carry. But I have not touched her. Not once. Not ever. The room was very quiet. Vivienne did not soften. She did not reach for him or offer him the absolution he had not asked for. But something shifted in the quality of her stillness. Not warmth exactly, but the absence of a particular coldness. Like a window opened in a room that has been sealed too long. I now know enough, she said at last, to do what I came to do. And I will do it whether you support me or not. But I wanted you to know that I heard what you said. He nodded once and left the study. And Vivienne sat down at the desk with Caroline's letter and the Latin papers and the weight of 30 days. And she began to plan. She went to the Foreign Office on a Tuesday. She wore full mourning. The black silk she had last worn for her father's funeral, the jet brooch, the black gloves, the veil she carried rather than wore, folded over her arm like a flag she had not yet decided to raise. The choice was deliberate. She was burying the woman she had been for 8 years, and she wanted the costume to be accurate. 3 senior clerks and 2 undersecretaries were in the main hall when she arrived. She gave her name at the desk. She signed the identification form in her clear Vienna hand. She waited 6 minutes in a chair that was not comfortable, and then a junior official appeared with a sealed box, and she signed for it, and she stood, and she walked out. The story was in the clubs before dinner. A duchess who had been discussed in those clubs for 8 years, the absent wife, the cold marriage, the strange arrangement, had walked into the Foreign Office like a figure from a different era and walked out carrying a sealed box, and no one who was present could say precisely what it meant. But they all understood that it meant something, and they said so to each other at considerable length. Lord Ashford arrived at Westmere House at 11 the following morning. He was 70, stout, with the particular confidence of a man who had held ministerial power for so long that he had forgotten it was not a natural condition. He was shown into the drawing room. Vivienne received him there, standing, the sealed box on the writing desk behind her. You will return that document to the archive, Lord Ashford said, without preliminary. You will return it today, and you will send a letter of withdrawal to the Foreign Secretary's office, and this entire matter will be treated as a clerical error. No, said Vivienne. Your Grace, he said, I have the means to ensure that your name does not appear on a single reputable guest list in this city for the next 10 years. I have the means to ensure that your sister's engagement. You have already applied pressure to Caroline's engagement through the circulation of gossip, Vivienne said, and it has not produced the result you wanted. Applying more pressure will not change my decision. It will only give me additional material when I speak to the Foreign Secretary this week. She paused. Lord Ashford, you arranged a paid woman to inhabit the margins of my husband's public life for 3 years, for the purpose of maintaining a political fiction that required my silence and my disgrace. You did this without my knowledge, without my consent, and in full awareness that it would make my position in this city untenable. I have spent 8 years absorbing the consequences of a choice I made freely. I will not spend one more day absorbing the consequences of a choice you made for your own convenience. He opened his mouth. "You may go," she said. He went. Lucian had been in the adjoining room. She had not known he was there, or she had not acknowledged knowing. But when the front door closed behind Lord Ashford, she heard the connecting door open, and she heard his step cross the floor, and he came into the drawing room and found her at the writing desk with the sealed box in front of her. Her hands were trembling. It was the first time in 8 years that her hands had done that in front of anyone, and she looked at them for a moment as though they belonged to someone else, as though the shaking was a surprise she had not prepared for. Lucian sat beside her. He did not speak. He placed his hand over hers on the lid of the sealed box, and the trembling slowed, and she did not remove her hand from under his. And they remained that way for a long time, without either of them saying anything at all. Neither of them slept that night. Vivian came down to the library at 2:30. Lucian was already there, in the chair nearest the dying fire, not reading, not writing, simply sitting in the way of a man who had tried to sleep and found it unavailable. He looked up when she entered, but said nothing. She sat at the opposite end of the sofa. For an hour they did not speak. The fire dropped from flame to coal to the dull red pulse of something almost finished. The room grew gradually darker. At some point, she could not have said when exactly, because she had not been watching for it. Her hand found his on the cushion between them. His fingers closed over hers, not urgently, not with the drama of a gesture. Simply as one thing settling beside another thing that had been beside it before. They stayed that way until the fire went out. Neither looked at the other. Neither spoke. But when the room was fully dark and fully cold, neither moved to leave. In the morning, a formal envelope arrived from Lord Ashford's secretary. Inside was an invitation to a private political dinner at Almack's the following evening. A gathering of half the cabinet, various ministerial associates, and several guests whose names Vivian recognized from 8 years of careful social observation. Mrs. Lyle's name appeared on the list. Lucian's name appeared on the list, with the notation that his attendance was expected. Vivian's name did not appear at all. The assumption was clear and was meant to be clear. Almack's was a room she had avoided for 8 years, and Lord Ashford had calculated that she would avoid it for one more night, which was all he needed. She read the invitation. She set it on the writing desk beside the sealed box. She considered both of them for a moment, and then she rang for her maid. "I will need the diamonds tonight," she said. "The full set, the ones from my wedding." She arrived at Almack's at 8:30. She had not sent word. She had not requested admittance. She walked through the entrance of the private dining room as though she had reserved it herself, in full diamonds, in the dark blue silk that she had ordered 3 weeks ago for no occasion she had named to anyone. And the room, 32 people, half the cabinet, every person Lord Ashford had assembled to witness Lucian's continued compliance, went completely silent. She walked the length of the room. It took perhaps 20 seconds, and in those 20 seconds, every conversation stopped, and every head turned, and the only sound was the small, precise rhythm of her steps on the parquet floor. She did not look at Mrs. Lyle. She did not look at Lord Ashford. She did not look at Lucian, who was standing at the far end of the table, and who had gone very still in the way she had learned to read, as the face underneath the face he usually showed. She stopped at the main table. She placed the sealed box in front of the Foreign Secretary, who was a man named Cavendish, 63, whom she had met 4 times in 8 years, and who had the grace to look directly at her when she addressed him. "Sir," she said, "what I am placing before you is a document that has been held in your office's archive for 8 years under my name. It is a false confession, written and signed by me, for a diplomatic breach I did not commit." She paused, and the room was so quiet that the pause was audible. "I signed it voluntarily, in full knowledge of what I was doing, to protect the person who was responsible. I am reclaiming it tonight because the cost of maintaining that protection has ceased to be mine to carry. I have carried it for 8 years, and I have carried it alone, and I am done." She did not name Lucian. She did not have to. Every person at the table had understood within the first 2 sentences, and the understanding moved through the room like a current through still water. And by the time she stopped speaking, there was not a face in the room that did not know exactly what she meant. She turned to Mrs. Lyle. Mrs. Lyle was seated 3 chairs from the end of the table, in the rows she always wore, and she had the particular expression of a woman who has realized, in the last 90 seconds, that the ground beneath her has shifted significantly, and she does not yet know how far. "Mrs. Lyle," Vivian said pleasantly, in the tone she had used across the tea tray 4 days ago. "I wonder if you might tell me, and the room, since we are all gathered, the precise nature and terms of your arrangement with the Westmere household. Specifically, who engaged you, who pays your stipend, and through which account." The room heard it as wit. Mrs. Lyle heard it as the end of everything. She sat with her mouth slightly open, and the smile she had prepared for the evening still arranged on her face. And she said nothing, because every answer available to her confirmed the same thing: that she was a paid arrangement, that she had always been a paid arrangement, and that the woman who had just walked the length of this room in diamonds and a false confession had known it, and had now made certain that 31 other people knew it too. "No matter," Vivian said, turning away from her with the same serene inattention she had deployed at Lady Marbury's dinner. She faced Lucien. He was at the end of the table, and he was watching her with the expression she had not seen on his face in 8 years. Not the performance, not the managed distance, but the face of a man who was looking at his wife and seeing her clearly for the first time in a very long time, and who understood, from the quality of her gaze, that she was looking back. "I will be at home tomorrow," Vivian said, in a voice the entire table could hear. "At 4 o'clock, if you wish to call on me." She picked up the sealed box from in front of the Foreign Secretary. She walked back the length of the room. She walked out. The doors closed behind her. Inside the room, nobody spoke for a full 5 seconds. And then, from somewhere near the middle of the table, someone cleared his throat, and the sound of it broke the silence, and 31 people began the slow process of deciding what they had just witnessed and what they were going to do with it. By morning, the newspapers carried enough. Not the full story. The full story was too particular and too specific for the papers to have assembled it overnight. But enough. The withdrawal of a document from the Foreign Office archive by the Duchess of Westmere, the private dinner at Almack's, the presence of certain guests and the nature of certain remarks. It was reported with the careful obliqueness of journalists who understood that the libel laws existed, and that what they could imply was considerably more interesting than what they could state, and what they implied was sufficient. Lord Ashford issued a statement through his secretary describing the matter as a private affair between a husband and wife, which was precisely the description that served him least and which he issued anyway, because it was the only one available. The paid arrangement with Mrs. Lyle, now confirmed by her silence in front of 30 witnesses, ceased to be viable before noon. Mrs. Lyle left London within the week. Caroline's future mother-in-law withdrew her objection on the 5th day. She sent a note to Caroline describing it as a misunderstanding based on incomplete information, which was accurate in the sense that she had been missing the most important piece. And she had now received it, and the piece had changed the picture entirely. The engagement held. At 4 o'clock, Lucien arrived at Westmere House. James opened the door and took his hat and coat with the composed neutrality of a lackey who had worked in this house for 6 years and had learned to register nothing. Lucien was shown to the library. Vivienne was already there, standing at the window with the afternoon light behind her. She turned when he entered, and they looked at each other across the room for a moment. And then he sat down, and she sat down, and they began to speak. They spoke for an hour. They spoke plainly, which was new, and they spoke at length, which was also new. And the conversation covered the confession and the morning she had signed it, and what she had seen on his face when she handed it to him, and what he had done with that knowledge for 8 years. It covered the arrangement with Lord Ashford and the 3 years of Mrs. Lyle, and the mornings he had walked past her in this house and known what he was doing and done it anyway. It covered what it had cost her and what it had cost him, and the difference between those two costs, which was considerable and which neither of them minimized. It was the first honest conversation of their marriage. When Lucien finally rose, he said, "I should go." He crossed to the door. He had his hand on the frame. "Lucien," Vivienne said. He turned. She crossed the room. She kissed him once, slowly, with both hands against his chest and his hands finding her face as though remembering the shape of it from a very long time ago. It was not a return. There was nothing to return to. The marriage they had briefly had 8 years ago had been too new and too untested to serve as a destination. It was something else, an arrival at something they had never yet reached, something that had been waiting on the other side of 8 years of silence and 1 hour of honesty. When she stepped back, he was looking at her with the plain, unperformed expression of a man who had forgotten what his face did when he was not performing, and had just remembered. 2 months later, the drawing room was finally the drawing room. Someone, Vivienne, one morning, without ceremony, had ordered the curtains opened, and they had stayed open, and the afternoon light now crossed the floor in long, warm bars that reached the writing desk and the side tables, and the small arrangement of roses that had appeared on the mantelpiece 3 weeks ago, and been replaced when they faded, without comment, by anyone. A book lay closed on a side table. 2 cups of tea sat on the tray, both half finished, recently set down. The fire was low. The room had the quality of a room that was lived in, not maintained. A room that had been allowed, at last, to contain the life that was being lived inside it. On the writing desk, a letter to Caroline lay half finished. Its opening line read, "My dearest Caroline, I am writing to congratulate you on the date of your wedding, which I understand is now confirmed for the 14th of September, and to tell you that I am very glad indeed." The curtains were open. The light came in. The room, for the first time in 8 years, was simply a room, and the woman who had kept it half dark for so long had finally decided, without drama and without announcement, that the light was something she was willing to let herself have.